Smoke clawed at Madison's lungs as the stairwell blurred into darkness. She stumbled, sure she was about to die, until the door crashed open. Through the haze, a firefighter appeared, strong arms wrapping around her. "Stay with me. I've got you." Madison Carter moved through life with a sense of detachment, her days wrapped in a cocoon of privilege that shielded her from discomfort. At 28, she had everything that many would envy: a chic apartment in an upscale neighborhood, a promising career in marketing, and the kind of beauty that turned heads. Her body was curvy, full, and voluptuous, the kind men glanced at when she passed. Thick thighs, a round waist, generous hips, and a softness that she carried with unshaken confidence. But beneath the layers of confidence and charm lay a darker truth. Madison's worldview was deeply shaped by fear. Fear that had been fed to her in subtle doses for as long as she could remember. She didn't think of herself as hateful. No, she preferred to believe she was cautious. When she saw a black man on the sidewalk, her first instinct was always to tighten her grip on her purse. When walking down the street at night, if she spotted a group of young black men in hoodies, she crossed to the other side without hesitation. When friends invited her into neighborhoods where the demographics didn't mirror her own, she politely declined, telling herself she just preferred to stay closer to home. These weren't malicious acts, she told herself, just safe ones. But the truth was less flattering. Her instincts were born not from facts, but from fear. A fear that had been handed down through hushed conversations at family dinners, through the offhand comments of friends, through years of subtle conditioning in a society that told her, in ways both loud and quiet, that black men were dangerous. She never stopped to question it. Why would she? Her life had been carefully curated to avoid the uncomfortable. "Better safe than sorry," her mother used to say when Madison was young, gently pulling her closer when a black man passed them on the sidewalk. You never know with them. Madison had absorbed those words like gospel. She grew up internalizing the silent warnings of her parents, the echoed nods of agreement from friends, and the reinforcement of news stories that always seemed to show the same faces attached to crime. Over time, her fear grew roots, deep and tangled, until it became indistinguishable from common sense in her mind. By the time she reached adulthood, Madison had perfected the art of avoidance. She lived in a neighborhood where the faces around her looked like hers, mostly white, middle class, predictably safe. She worked in an office where diversity meant someone who drank oat milk instead of regular. Her favorite coffee shops were the ones where baristas knew her name, places where she never had to feel out of place. Every decision she made kept her in the bubble she'd unconsciously built, a bubble that insulated her from the reality of people she'd been taught to fear. Still, there were moments she caught herself, glimpses of unease that flickered when she realized how automatic her reactions were. Once, while walking home from work, a black man in a suit had approached from the other end of the sidewalk. He was clearly just another professional heading home after a long day, but Madison's body stiffened anyway. Her purse strap cut into her palm as she clutched it tighter, her heart ticking up in pace. When he passed, he gave her a polite nod, and Madison flushed with embarrassment. Why did I react like that? She asked herself, but the thought was gone as quickly as it had come. Her mind gave her the usual excuse. It's not personal. It's just safer this way. Conversations with her friends only reinforced her thinking. They didn't say anything overtly hateful, not in the way people from her grandparents' generation might have. Instead, their words were laced with subtle suspicion, casual remarks that cemented Madison's caution. You know how those neighborhoods are. You just have to be careful, that's all. It was enough to keep her comfortable in her beliefs, never pressed to examine them more deeply. And so Madison drifted through life with ease. Her apartment stood like a fortress in the heart of the city, far removed from the communities she quietly feared. She woke up early for her morning Pilates classes, grabbed lattes from the cafe downstairs, and took cabs instead of the subway whenever she had to go downtown. Everything was predictable. Everything was safe. But safe was also stagnant. Late at night, when Madison lay awake staring at the ceiling, she sometimes felt the weight of her sameness pressing down on her. The same faces, the same routines, the same patterns over and over. There was no challenge in her life, no disruption to shake her from her certainty. And deep down, in the quiet corners of her mind, she wondered if, maybe, just maybe, she was afraid of more than just black men. Maybe she was afraid of the unknown itself. One chilly evening, as she walked home from the wine bar where she'd met friends, Madison caught her reflection in a shop window. Her thick body hugged by a fitted dress, blonde hair curled nightly around her face,
and blue eyes that looked sharp even in the dim light. She looked composed, unbothered, but she knew what hid beneath that reflection. The tension in her chest, the reflexive fear that was always waiting to surface. She sighed and turned away from the glass. "Have you ever been blinded by your own fears?" She whispered to herself, the words slipping out before she could stop them. It wasn't a question she was ready to answer. Not yet. The truth, however, was waiting for her. Waiting in the form of a fire she could never have predicted, and a man she could never have allowed herself to know under any other circumstances. A man whose presence would unravel every belief she had carefully clung to. That night, Madison walked into her apartment building unaware that her life was about to be set ablaze, both literally and figuratively. She had no idea that the same fear she carried in her chest would soon be tested in ways that would strip her bare. No idea that the very man she would have once crossed the street to avoid would soon be the one carrying her out of the flames. And no idea that what began in fire would ignite something even more powerful inside her.
The night split open with a shriek. At first, Madison thought it was a car alarm in the street below, some distant nuisance that would resolve itself if she pulled the duvet over her ears. But the sound didn't taper, it thickened, multiplied. A second alarm joined from the hallway. Then the pulsing red of the strobe began to paint her bedroom walls in frantic bursts. She sat up, groggy and confused, and the world arrived with a smell. Sharp, sour, unmistakable. Smoke. Fire? The word crawled out of her throat like a dare. She threw off the sheets, slipped her feet into slippers, and reached for the silk robe hanging on the closet door. The apartment was already hazy. A smear of gray hovered near the ceiling, turning the recessed lights into dull coins. She grabbed her phone and purse by reflex, then swore and dropped the purse as if it were guilty of something. You can't carry everything. She crawled low, just as a safety video once instructed, and touched the apartment door with the back of her hand. Hot. Adrenaline snapped whatever sleep remained right out of her. She dashed to the kitchen, opened a window, tried to think. Stairwell or exterior fire escape. The strobe washed the counters, the table, her reflection in the oven door. Her chest tightened. She coughed. The alarms were no longer alarms. They were an accusation. Move. She wet a dish towel at the sink, pressed it to her nose and mouth, and cracked the door. A sheet of smoke slithered in like a living thing. The hallway lights were out. People were shouting somewhere. Doors slamming, someone crying, a dog barking itself hoarse. Madison's heart sprinted ahead of her as she stepped into the hall, crouched, and felt her way toward the stairwell by memory. The carpet under her feet was damp and gritty. The air stung her eyes until they watered and her lashes clumped. Lower. Stay low. She knelt, practically crawled, counting the doors as if they were rosary beads. By the time she reached the stairwell door, she was coughing in ragged bursts. The metal felt like a radiator under her palm. She used the edge of her robe to pull and shoved with her shoulder. The stairwell was a black tunnel. Heat rolled up it in waves, and somewhere far below a roar like 1,000 flags tearing at once pushed against her. She tried to descend. The first step stole her breath. The second buckled her knee. Panic clawed up her back. The towel wasn't working anymore. She felt strangely light, as if her bones had turned to sugar. You will not die here. The thought arrived with startling clarity, followed by another. You don't know the first thing about how to live. She staggered backward, one hand sliding along the cool cinder block, and then a different sound cut through the blanket of chaos. Boots, fast and sure, the clipped chatter of a radio, a beam of white light slicing the dark. A figure materialized through the smoke, broad-shouldered, helmeted, a rectangle of reflective striping blinking with the strobe. He seemed both enormous and precise, as if carved for a single purpose and in the exact moment of using it. "Ma'am," his voice was amplified by the mask, warm even through the machinery. "I've got you. Don't move." She didn't trust her legs anyway. He was on her in seconds, kneeling to her level. The brass letters on his turnout coat glinted in the strobe. Lawson. He slid a compact hood from a pouch on his belt, yellow, soft, a strange, life-size puppet head, and opened it with practiced hands. "Rescue hood," he said, the words measured, steady,
the antidote to her stampeding thoughts. Over your head, slow breaths. I'm connecting you to my air. Look at me. She tried and found eyes behind the mask, dark, focused, biting through the smoke and the terror to hold her gaze. There you go. Stay with me. He tugged the hood over her hair, tucked the elastic under her jaw, and cinched it at her collarbone. Cool air spilled across her face like winter. The world jumped backward a few inches, the noise receded enough for her to think. He guided her hand to a strap on his coat. Don't let go. Keep low. He swept the stairwell with his light, consulted the thermal camera hanging from his neck, and moved, keeping his body between her and the hungry heat rising from below. They descended, a small, slow animal of two. Madison clung to the strap and to the solidity of his presence. Every motion of his was purposeful. A tap to the railing with his gloved knuckles before he stepped, the tilt of his helmet as he scanned, the way he counted quietly, 5 more, 4 more, 3 more, as if he could manufacture a floor landing out of syllables. A door several flights down blew open somewhere with a boom that emptied Madison's mind. She stiffened, trembling. His hand found her shoulder. I've got you. She'd always imagined heroes as loud. He was quiet. The quiet, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was respect for the stakes. They hit the 7th floor landing, then the 6th. With every flight, the heat dipped from unbearable to punishing to merely mean. The hood fogged. Sweat ran into Madison's eyes and burned. Once, her foot slipped on something slick and her shin smashed the edge of a step. Before the pain could register, his arm looped around her waist and lifted. No hesitation, no complaint. He adjusted her against him, a careful, powerful carry, and took the next steps faster. Unit 3, victim located, female, conscious, and breathing. He said into his radio between breaths. He gave cross streets and a progress report. Another voice crackled in reply, a chorus of organized urgency. At the 3rd floor landing, they passed a family huddled together. 2 parents, a toddler, a terrier, and a blanket. Another firefighter was with them, waving toward a door held open with a wedge, where a hallway sentry line of hoses snaked like pale, thick vines. The other firefighter signaled a thumbs up when he saw Lawson's burden. The toddler reached a small hand toward Madison, and for one absurd moment, Madison wanted to cry at the sight of jam on the child's sleeve. Life keeps happening, even here. The lobby doors were an altar of daylight. They pushed through into a barrage of sound, sirens, shouted names, the churn of diesel. Cold night slapped Madison's damp skin. Someone shouted, "Victim coming out," and hands appeared, guiding her onto a gurney with a crisp efficiency that felt like kindness. The hood came off. The oxygen mask went on. She blinked hard as reality reassembled itself. The building coughing smoke into the sky. Neighbors wrapped in blankets, a woman praying into her palms, a firefighter hosing down a hotspot in a window that looked unsettlingly like her own. Lawson leaned near, one hand on the rail of her gurney. Without the strobe and smoke, she could see him. The soot smudged into the seams of his brow, the sweat silvering the edges of his hairline, the name Lawson again across his chest like a banner he had earned. He gave her a quick assessing look, and his eyes softened when he saw that she was tracking him. "You're okay," he said, lowering the mask just enough for her to hear him clearly. Slow, deep breaths. "You did great." It struck her as ridiculous. I did nothing. He had been the one stepping into heat and blind corners and the architecture of catastrophe. But the compliment found some unburned part inside her and settled there like a hand over a bird's frantic heart. "Thank you," she managed, her voice a rasp. Words crumbled. He nodded as if he had heard them anyway. A paramedic asked her questions. Name, age, any medical conditions, pain level. Madison answered on autopilot. Her gaze kept snagging at Lawson as he moved back toward the building, conferred with his captain, accepted a fresh bottle for his air supply, and then, before he disappeared inside again, knelt beside an elderly man on the curb whose shoulders shook beneath a foil blanket. Lawson took the man's trembling hands in his gloved ones and spoke close, steady, present. The man's shoulders eased as if someone had lifted a weight. Madison watched, oxygen hissing, chest aching, and felt something drop out of her. A small hard stone she had carried for years without naming. It wasn't only that he had saved her, it was the way he moved through the emergency, attentive without spectacle, strong without dominance, the kind of strength that made room, rather than closing it off. He wasn't a story she had been told. He was a person, and people she realized demanded a different kind of seeing. They wanted to take her to the hospital for observation. She refused at first, stubborn and shaking, then relented when the paramedic explained the risks of smoke inhalation in a voice that left no room for vanity. The ambulance's interior lights were gentle. Somewhere behind them, a window shattered with the delicate, terrible sound of ice breaking. Madison closed her eyes and saw the stairwell again, saw the light from Lawson's helmet swing in a practiced arc, saw the letters of his name steadying like a mantra. Lawson, Lawson, Lawson. At the ER, a nurse fitted a pulse oximeter to her finger and told her she would be fine. Her levels were rebounding. Madison's hair smelled like a campfire built by a child. Her shin throbbed where she had struck the step. Every time she blinked, she saw the hood lowering and felt the cool flood of air as if it were a blessing being repeated. Hours later, released with an inhaler and pamphlet, she returned to a building wrapped in tape and steam. Volunteers handed out water and vouchers for hotels. She took one and looked up at the black-lipped windows, at the smear the smoke had left against the sky, and then down the block where Engine 27 idled, men in turnout coats coiling a last line. Lawson stood with his helmet tucked under his arm, talking quietly with a woman whose hands fluttered as if each word needed to land in a precise place. He nodded with the focus he'd given Madison in the stairwell. When the woman finished, Lawson bent, picked up a damp stuffed rabbit from the curb, and pressed it into her hands. She wept, like a relief valve opening. Madison wanted to approach him, to say something that wasn't just "thank you," something that could carry the weight of what he had just changed inside her. But words felt small beside the heat and noise of the night, and part of her, the most honest part, knew that gratitude, while necessary, would become a way of keeping her distance if she let it. A transaction, not a transformation. He turned then and caught her looking. Not a dramatic movie moment, just a flicker of recognition that settled into a small, tired smile. He lifted 2 fingers in a nod that meant, "I remember you. You're okay. Go rest." She lifted her hand back and felt the absurd urge to apologize for everything she had ever thought about men like him, as if saying it aloud could unspool years of reflex and rumor. Instead, she held the moment inside her like a coal. It wouldn't cool, even hours later in the hotel room where the minibar hummed and the city kept breathing without her. She lay awake and replayed the descent, the careful count of steps, the hand on her shoulder, the street yawning open like grace, the name on his coat, the steadiness in his eyes. When morning finally loosened its grip on the night, Madison understood 2 truths at once. The first, without Derrick Lawson, she would not be alive. The second, because of Derrick Lawson, she could not return to the version of herself who had existed before. She showered for a long time, steam swallowing the last phantom whiff of smoke. And as the water drummed her shoulders, she made herself a quiet promise, one that sounded almost like a prayer. Find out who he is when there are no alarms. Learn to see, then learn to stay.
The fire was a week behind her, yet Madison Carter still woke at odd hours with the sound of alarms ringing in her school. The image of the stairwell was burned into her mind. Black smoke, heat pressing down like a physical weight, and then him, Derrick Lawson, emerging out of the chaos like a figure written into her survival. She had whispered his name over and over in those first sleepless nights, tracing the letters she'd seen on his turnout coat as if they were carved into her ribs. But what haunted her wasn't just the fire. It was the uncomfortable realization that Derrick wasn't the man she had been taught to fear.
He wasn't a shadow in an alleyway or a threat to be avoided. He was the man who had pulled her broken breath back into rhythm, who had carried her when her legs failed, who had offered steady calm when her world was unraveling. For days, she tried to push it aside. She told herself she was only grateful, that what she felt was survivor's gratitude amplified by trauma. She busied herself with insurance forms, long showers to rinse away the phantom scent of smoke, and nights spent in a hotel suite provided by the Red Cross. Yet no matter how much she tried to drown it out, the truth gnawed at her. Her worldview was cracked, and through those cracks, Derrick Lawson kept stepping into the light. It was on a Saturday afternoon, when Madison intended only to drop off supplies for displaced tenants at the local community center, that she saw him again. The large gymnasium echoed with chatter, the air heavy with the smell of disinfectant and crayons. Children ran past her with squeals of laughter, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She carried her grocery bags awkwardly, scanning for a volunteer table. And then she froze. At the far end of the room, Derrick Lawson knelt on the floor, surrounded by a semicircle of children. He wasn't wearing a uniform this time, just jeans and a gray t-shirt stretched across his broad shoulders, his firefighter strength evident, even out of gear. He held a colorful children's book in his hands, reading aloud with animated voices that made the kids shriek with delight. His laughter was deep, warm, unrestrained, nothing like the clipped commands he'd barked into a radio during the fire. Madison stood in the doorway far longer than she meant to, the paper handles of the grocery bags biting into her palms. She had never imagined him outside the context of fire and smoke, never imagined that someone who had looked like such a towering figure of control in crisis could also sit cross-legged on the floor with children hanging on his every word. Her throat tightened. When he finished the story, he closed the book and leaned forward, speaking to the children in a voice that was softer but no less commanding. "You gotta believe in yourselves," he told them. "Reading opens doors, it takes you places. And one day, you're going to use what you learned to help someone else, just like people helped me." The kids clapped, some shouting his name. Madison's heart ached with something she couldn't define. She had grown up surrounded by people who reinforced her suspicions, people who echoed each other's warnings about black men, about communities she never dared enter. Yet here was Derrick Lawson, not a shadow, not a stereotype, just a man giving his time to teach children to believe in themselves. And the worst part was how hard it was to look away. She found herself lingering at the community center more than she needed to. What was supposed to be a quick errand stretched into an hour of accidental wandering. She saw him again in the kitchen, stacking boxes of donated canned goods onto shelves with the precision of someone who took pride in even the smallest task. She overheard him joking with the elderly volunteers, his laughter contagious. She saw the way he bent down to listen to a frail old woman describing her worries about her displaced family, and how he promised food would be delivered to their hotel before nightfall. Every act she witnessed chipped away at the wall she had built inside herself. The Madison of 2 weeks ago would have avoided this place altogether. She would have told herself it wasn't her concern, that her presence wasn't needed. And if she had walked in and seen Derrick Lawson, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, commanding, she would have turned on her heel, made up an excuse, and left without thinking twice. Now, though, she found her eyes following him, her chest tightening with conflicting emotions: gratitude, admiration, shame, and, though she hardly wanted to admit it, something warmer. Something that made her stomach flutter when she realized his smile had the power to light a room more brightly than any rescue spotlight. Their first words outside the fire came at the checkout line of a grocery store. Madison had been standing with her basket, scrolling through her phone to avoid eye contact with strangers, when a deep voice behind her cut through her thoughts. "Hey." She turned, and there he was. No turnout gear, no smoke, no heroics. Just Derrick, casual, his expression warm and familiar. He was holding a basket filled with vegetables and bottled water, his presence commanding even in the mundane. For a split second, Madison froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The old instinct stirred, the reflex to retreat, to cross the street inside her own mind. But she forced herself to stand still. "How are you holding up after the fire?" Derrick asked, his tone gentle, free of pity. "I'm better, thanks to you." Derrick gave a modest smile, shrugging slightly. "Just doing my job." But Madison wasn't satisfied with that. She shook her head, gripping the handle of her basket as if it anchored her. "No, you didn't just do your job, you saved my life." The weight of her gratitude came out sharper than she meant it to, and her voice trembled, not with fear this time, but with disbelief at herself. The old Madison would never have admitted dependence on a man like him. The old Madison would never have even spoken to him in line. Derrick seemed to sense her turmoil, though he didn't pry. He simply nodded. "I'm glad I could help." And with that, the line moved forward, and he turned back to his groceries as if their brief exchange hadn't just shaken Madison's world. That night, lying awake in her temporary hotel room, Madison thought about the encounter. She thought about the children's laughter at the community center, about the way Derrick listened so intently to an old woman's worries, about the smile he gave her in the checkout line. And she thought about herself, about the way her entire body had stiffened when he first approached, even after everything he had done. Shame curled around her like smoke. How many times had she crossed streets to avoid men like him? How many times had she clutched her purse, let her imagination build them into monsters? Her chest ached when she realized that for most of her life, she had been part of the problem. She had fed the same prejudice that Mrs. Evans, her elderly neighbor, spat so casually when she said black men didn't belong. She had told herself she was different, that she wasn't hateful, just cautious. But seeing Derrick as he truly was shattered that illusion. Her caution hadn't been harmless. It had been poison, seeping into every glance, every decision, every excuse. And now that she had seen him clearly, she couldn't unsee it. She knew she was changing, whether she wanted to or not. The cracks in her wall of prejudice were spreading. Through them, Derrick Lawson's kindness kept shining. And Madison couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, her life had been waiting for this fire to finally set her free.
The crisp Sunday air carried a deceptive calm as Madison Carter stepped out of her temporary hotel room, groceries in hand. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, the kind of noise she once found comforting. Life was falling back into place. Insurance paperwork had been filed, her building was under repair, and the routines she clung to were returning one by one. But her mind was not the same. Something in her had shifted, broken open like a window smashed from the inside, letting light rush into spaces she had long left dark. And that shift was tested the moment she heard the voice. "Honestly, I don't know what this neighborhood is coming to." It was Mrs. Evans, her elderly neighbor with the neatly coiffed gray curls and pearl earrings, the woman who always had a kind word about Madison's dresses or her career. Today, though, her voice was low and sharp, dripping with suspicion. Madison slowed, groceries heavy in her hands, as she saw her neighbor gathered with two friends on the sidewalk just outside the fire-damaged building. Her stomach dropped. Derrick Lawson stood across the street by his fire truck, speaking with a young boy who clutched a toy fire engine. His helmet rested under his arm, his smile easy, his posture open. The boy looked at him like he was the sun itself. But Mrs. Evans didn't see that. She saw only the color of his skin. "I've seen him hanging around here too much," she whispered conspiratorially, her words laced with venom. "Always talking to people, watching. I don't trust him. He just doesn't belong here." Madison stopped in her tracks. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her blood roared in her ears like the fire all over again. This wasn't just about Mrs. Evans. These words were a mirror, reflecting back the very prejudice Madison had carried for years. How many times had she thought the same thing? How many times had she felt that same suspicion tighten her chest? The shame came swift, but so did the anger.
She set her grocery bags down with more force than she intended, jars rattling inside, and strode toward the cluster of women. Her heart pounded, her throat tight, but the words tumbled out before she could stop them. "What are you talking about?" Madison's voice was sharper than she'd ever heard it, slicing through the air. "What exactly about Derrick is suspicious?" Mrs. Evans blinked, startled by the interruption. "Well, no," Madison cut her off, her pulse surging. "Don't even start. He has never done anything but help people. He saved lives in this building. He saved my life." Her cheeks flushed red, a mix of fury and shame. "And you stand here judging him because of the way he looks? Because you've already decided what he must be?" The older woman's lips tightened, her composure cracking. "Madison, dear, you don't understand. I've lived long enough to know how these people—" "These people?" Madison's voice rose, trembling but unyielding. "You have no idea who Derrick Lawson is. None. And I am done listening to this garbage." The other women exchanged uneasy glances, murmuring excuses as if suddenly needing to be elsewhere. Mrs. Evans bristled, her face pinching with indignation, but she faltered under Madison's glare. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Madison's heart hammered in her chest as she realized what she had just done, not only confronting her neighbor, but in truth, confronting herself. Because every word she had thrown at Mrs. Evans, she might as well have thrown at her own reflection. She had once carried those same prejudices. She had once crossed streets, clutched her purse, whispered excuses about safety. She had once believed she was being smart, cautious, better. And now, standing in the open with anger burning her throat, she realized she was no different than the woman she had just challenged. Her fury wasn't only for Mrs. Evans. It was for herself, for every moment of silence, every complicit nod, every excuse she had used to justify her own bias. She walked away, groceries abandoned on the pavement, her hands trembling. Across the street, Derrick glanced up from the boy he'd been talking to, his expression curious but unreadable. Madison's chest tightened as their eyes met. She quickly turned and hurried toward the hotel, her vision swimming with unshed tears. By the time she reached her room, she collapsed against the door, the sting of her neighbor's words still echoing. But louder than Mrs. Evans' suspicion was the truth reverberating inside Madison. I was her once. I let myself be her for years. I remembered every time I crossed the street to avoid men like Derrick, every time I thought, better safe than sorry, every time I let prejudice slip by unchallenged because it was easier. Her stomach churned. She wanted to believe she was different, that she wasn't hateful, just cautious. But now she saw the truth. Caution was her mask, fear was her companion, and silence was her betrayal. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. She thought of Derrick in the stairwell, his hands steady on her shoulder, his voice calm as the flames closed in. She thought of him kneeling on the floor with children, reading to them with a laughter that shook the room. She thought of him picking up a stuffed rabbit for a grieving child outside the fire scene. How could I have ever believed he was a danger? The question stabbed deep, but it was followed by another. What am I going to do now that I know the truth? That evening she found herself at the community center again. She hadn't planned to go, but her feet carried her there like she was drawn by some invisible thread. Inside, she heard his voice before she saw him. Low, steady, patient. He was explaining something to a teenager about fire safety, demonstrating how to crawl low under smoke. The boy's eyes shined with admiration, copying every move. Madison leaned against the doorway, her throat tight. The shame still lingered, but now it mingled with something else. Resolve. When Derrick finished, he looked up and spotted her. His expression softened, the corners of his lips tugging into a small, genuine smile. It was the same smile he had given her outside the grocery store, the same smile he had offered after saving her life, a smile that didn't ask for anything in return. Madison took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Her voice trembled, but her words carried a new weight. "Derrick," she said softly, I I need to say something." He tilted his head, curious. "What's on your mind?" Her hands twisted nervously in front of her. "I overheard someone today. They were saying horrible things about you, about how you don't belong. And for the first time, I realized how much of that I've been carrying inside me too. I've been guilty of the same thoughts, the same fears. I was no better than them." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I'm ashamed of the way I used to see you, of the way I used to see men like you, and I'm sorry." Derrick's gaze was steady, thoughtful. He didn't rush to fill the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "You're not the first to feel that way, and you won't be the last. But what matters is that you see it now, that you're willing to face it. That takes courage." Madison swallowed hard, her shame softening under the warmth of his words. For the first time, she felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough for her to breathe. As she left the community center that night, her steps felt lighter. The confrontation with Mrs. Evans had been painful, but necessary. It had forced her to see herself clearly, to acknowledge the prejudice she had once wrapped in excuses. The cracks in her wall were no longer just cracks. They were openings. And through them, Derrick Lawson shone brighter than ever, not just as the man who had saved her life, but as the man who was teaching her how to live differently.
The weeks rolled by, each one peeling away another layer of Madison Carter's old self. The fire had forced her out of her comfortable bubble. Derrick Lawson's steady presence had shown her the hollowness of her excuses. Confronting Mrs. Evans had cracked the mirror she had been hiding behind for years. But transformation is rarely neat. It was messy, raw, and exhausting, like learning to breathe new air after a lifetime of smoke. Madison often found herself reflecting at night, staring through the wide windows of her hotel room at the city below. She would think about who she had been before the fire, a woman who moved through the world curvy and confident on the surface, but quietly chained by prejudice beneath it. She remembered clutching her purse tighter when a black man passed, remembered every street she had crossed, every excuse she had made. Shame burned in her chest, but so did something else, a new kind of courage. That courage was tested again one evening when she returned to the community center. The sun had dipped below the skyline, leaving streaks of orange and purple in the sky, and the gymnasium inside was alive with chatter. Derrick was there, as always, his tall frame bent over a table as he helped two kids assemble model fire trucks. His deep laugh echoed across the room, drawing Madison in before she even realized she was moving toward him. When he noticed her, his eyes lit with recognition, warm and unguarded. "Hey, Madison." Her name and his voice made her chest tighten. She'd heard it screamed in fear, whispered in shame, muttered in self-doubt. But from him it sounded different. It sounded like forgiveness. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft, almost hesitant. She glanced at the children, their small hands fumbling with wheels and glue, and smiled. "Looks like you've got your hands full." He chuckled, shaking his head. "These two are better firefighters than me already. I'm just trying not to mess up their trucks." The kids laughed, one of them tugging his sleeve affectionately. Madison watched the exchange, her heart swelling. He wasn't just strong in crisis. He was gentle in the moments that didn't demand heroism. That was the part that undid her. When the kids ran off to show their creations to a volunteer, Madison found herself standing alone with him. The air between them seemed heavier now, charged with all the things she had been too afraid to say. "I've been meaning to talk to you, not just to thank you again. I need to be honest." Derrick leaned against the table, his expression patient. "Go on." Her throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "Before the fire, before you, I wasn't the person I wanted people to believe I was. I avoided men like you. I crossed streets,
clutched my purse, told myself I was just being cautious. But the truth is, I was afraid. I believed the lies I'd been fed my whole life. And when you saved me, I didn't just fight the fire, I fought myself. Because part of me still wanted to believe you were dangerous, even as you carried me out. Her voice cracked, tears stinging her eyes. I hate that. I hate that I let myself believe something so ugly for so long, and I'm so sorry. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of voices from the far side of the room. Madison braced herself for judgment, for disappointment, for him to turn away. Instead, Derrick's expression softened. I'm not the first person who's told me something like that, and you'll not be the last. But the fact that you're willing to admit it, to yourself and to me, that matters. It means you're not letting it own you anymore. Madison's chest shook with a sob she tried to swallow. I don't want to be that person again. I want to be better. To see people as they are, not as the world has told me to see them. And I know it's not your job to forgive me, but... Madison. His voice cut through her spiral, steady and grounding. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space. This isn't about me forgiving you. It's about you forgiving yourself. You've already started. I can see it. Her breath hitched as she met his gaze. His dark eyes held no judgment, only quiet strength, the same strength that had carried her through smoke and fire. In them she saw not just the man who had saved her life, but the man who was helping her rebuild it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Derrick reached out and brushed his hand against hers. It was a small gesture, tentative yet electric. Her fingers trembled, but didn't pull away. I respect you more than I can say, she whispered, her heart pounding. Not just because you saved me, but because of who you are. The way you give, the way you live. You've changed me. Derrick's lips curved into a smile, quiet and genuine. You've changed yourself, Madison. I just happened to be there when the fire lit the fuse. The words sank deep, and Madison felt something inside her finally give way. The shame, the fear, the excuses, they loosened their grip. In their place bloomed something terrifying and beautiful. Love. She didn't say it, not yet. The word felt too fragile to speak, but she knew it, felt it in every fiber of her being. She was falling for him, not the fantasy of a rescuer, but the reality of a man who lived with integrity and humility. The weeks that followed only deepened that truth. Madison began volunteering at the community center, working side by side with Derrick. She helped organize food drives, tutored children with their reading, even accompanied Derrick on visits to families displaced by the fire. At first, she felt like an intruder, like she was stepping into a world she didn't belong in, but Derrick never made her feel that way. He guided her gently, letting her learn through experience, letting her unlearn her prejudices with every act of service. And slowly, Madison began to see not just Derrick, but the entire community differently. She saw strength where she had once seen threat. She saw beauty where she had once seen fear. She saw humanity where she had once seen only color. Her transformation wasn't complete. She knew it would be a lifelong journey. But every time she looked at Derrick, she knew she was on the right path. One evening, after a long day of volunteering, they sat together on a bench outside the center. The city hummed around them, but the moment felt private, intimate. Derrick leaned back, gazing at the sky, while Madison rested her hands in her lap, her heart racing. I've learned a lot from you. About strength, about kindness, about myself. And I'm so grateful. Derrick turned to her, his expression unreadable for a beat, then softened into that familiar smile.
I'm just glad you found your way." I swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with tears. I think I'm starting to." And as they sat there, the distance between them slowly shrinking, Madison realized that what began in fire had become something else entirely. A love that was patient, a love that was transformative, a love born out of truth. She had hated once, she had feared, but now, as Derrick's hand found hers again beneath the quiet night sky, she understood. Love wasn't the absence of fear. It was the courage to face it and to let it burn away everything that had kept her from truly seeing. And for the first time in her life, Madison Carter saw clearly.